Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us at today's conference. Please, those of you still standing, take your seats and we will begin this conference. Just a brief introduction on my behalf as president of the foundation. I'm very happy that so many of you are here in a busy plenary session. I think this is one of the rare moments. In fact, it might be the first conference the foundation is organizing where we have a Patriot minister attending. So, Minister Hankó, thank you very much for joining us and being here.
Thank you for the invitation. Thanks.
And soon enough, we'll have another Patriot government in the Czech Republic. Hopefully, we'll also have the distinguished honor to have Czech ministers joining our conferences in the future.
We have already a Czech minister over there, former Czech minister.
Former Czech minister. So we are today going to discuss the question of Erasmus. Where is Erasmus going? Where is it right now? Just to give you a brief introduction, you know, when I was elected president of the foundation, I would have never thought that we would be having a political conference about Erasmus. Because when I was an Erasmus student, Erasmus was one of the most popular, if not the most popular, programs of the European Union, which was non-politicized. It was just generally something which is for all young people to travel around, to meet each other, and it wasn't specifically a contentious issue or a very debated issue. What we see now is twofold. There's two political reasons to have this on the agenda with the Patriots Foundation. One is, of course, what many of you already know because it has been ongoing for a long time, the discrimination against Hungarian students and researchers on behalf of the European Commission, which is something we've never seen before. And the second issue is the recent announcement by the European Commission that in the future it wants to extend Erasmus to Northern African countries, to Middle Eastern countries, etc., while at the same time the discrimination against Hungarians persists. So I think this is because we do like, on the other hand, to discuss matters of sovereignty, matters of identity and culture wars with the Patriots Foundation. I'm very happy that we have now on this agenda with distinguished speakers at our conference. So I don't want to take more of your time. Thank you for coming. And Catherine, I give the floor back to you.
Merci beaucoup, Andras. Chers amis.
Thank you, Andras. Dear friends, it was so honored to have you here today in the European Parliament to speak, as you said, Andras, to speak about something which is so important, the Erasmus program. So thank you for your presence today. You are so numerous. I would like to particularly thank Mr. Hankó, the Minister for Culture and Innovation in Hungary. It's an honor to have you here, sir, with us for this conference. So during the latest European campaign, our President, Jordan Bardella, made a presentation on his tricolor program, green, orange, red, simple code to explain what we want to support, or monitor and fight against. And in this classification, Erasmus was in green, and he was right. Erasmus was one of the greatest successes of the EU. Over 12 million young people have been able to study and learn in another European country. It's a link in our civilization, but now this heritage is being threatened. For years, the European Commission has been walking away from the original spirit of Erasmus to turning into an ideological instrument, sometimes a tool to put political pressure. I've been a member of the Culture Commission since 2019 and a coordinator of the Patriots group since the beginning of this term. So I wanted to raise public awareness in the greater public on the development of the Erasmus program because facts are there and they're no longer acceptable. Today, we're facing two major issues that you mentioned, Andras. First, the Hungarian situation where Erasmus is used as a political sanction. Since 2021, the European Commission, as you know, has excluded most of the universities from Hungary, and so their students from the Erasmus program. It's not unfair. It's a moral fault. It's a political fault. Punishing the students to sanction a government that's been elected, it's an elected government, I insist, This is what Tocqueville would have called abuse of centralization that destroys freedom by claiming to organize it. This is the way of the EU today. In my recent talks with Minister Hankó, he explained to me that this is not only Hungary that's targeted, this is the freedom of the nations that's targeted. So our guests will explain the current situation, the blackmail and the persecution submitted by Hungary from the EU Commission. We're also facing migration problem and help to Islamists. Hungary is being excluded, but other institutions which have clear links with Islamist movements keep receiving EU funding from Erasmus. We have the example of Gaziantep University in Turkey is so clear. The rector publicly uh, welcomed the head of Hamas, which is an organization acknowledged as a terrorist organization by the EU. And in spite of that, this university is still involved in Erasmus+. The same for the Islamic University of Gaza, which is a campus of Hamas. In 2021, they received 1.8 million euros of EU funding through Erasmus. So we were the first ones with Jean Paul to denounce that situation, and we keep telling that, but the EU Commission doesn't want to hear us. So how can we explain that these universities keep receiving EU money, whereas Hungary, which is a member state of the EU, is set aside? This is a two-standard approach, which is an insult to the citizens paying for the programs. There's more, dear friends. The EU Commission announced a few weeks back that it will double the budget of the Erasmus program to reach 42 billion euros, to extend it to the countries of the south of the Mediterranean, like Syria, Algeria, Egypt, Tunisia, Palestine, you name it, instead of investing into our universities. So the Commission will transform Erasmus into a section for immigration. We're financing migration. Our responsibility to provide for the security of our civilization and our culture in the EU. When a university is more like a gateway for migrants, not an academic institution, then yes, it is urgent to act. So dear friends, we don't want to attack Erasmus. We don't want to weaken the program. On the contrary, we want to save it. Erasmus must remain a program at the service of the young Europeans and not an instrument to redesign Europe against the willingness of its people. And it's a tool to teach people, not to erase the European civilization. We don't want to contribute to the end of it. So Yeltsin reminds us that losing your identity means losing your freedom. This is the situation today. The purpose of the conference is to raise awareness among political stakeholders like the European greater public to the issues that we have highlighted and to actually explain what's going on in this drifting program. We are facing an uneasy situation. We've asked a moral question, which you have co-signed. It's been supported by members of parliament from 4 political groups, including from the EPP. This clearly shows that this struggle goes beyond the traditional opposition between political parties. So I propose to organize this conference with 2 panels that will bring concrete solutions. First, we'll speak about the instrumentalization of the Erasmus program by the EU Commission against one of its own member states. And the second panel will speak about its willingness to turn Erasmus into a migration tool. So for the first part, I will host Mr. Balázs, the Hungarian Minister for Culture. He will describe the bureaucratic red tape and the blackmail that his country is being targeted with by the EU Commission. And then Rodrigo Ballester, advisor to the Hungarian government from the MCC and Study Center. He's an advisor explaining the technocracy of Brussels. They will witness the unjustifiable pressure against a member state, which is a sovereign state. This pressure can apply to any state that would follow its own way instead of technocrats, the technocrats project in Brussels. Sir, Mr. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you for the invitation. And I will try to give you a short summary on the Hungarian Erasmus case and what is behind. And if you allow me, I will use my native language, the beautiful Hungarian language. because we have so many words when I'm trying to use the Hungarian, what is the real reason behind, and we have some dirty words in Hungarian which is not exist in English. Először is.
So first of all, the question is whether does the European Commission has the right to do what it is doing? No, it doesn't. Secondly, any kind of utilization of the European Union funds, does it pose a risk when it is used by the European or the Hungarian students and universities researchers? No. So why is this happening? Well, it is happening because a nation stood up for its own identity. Once, twice, 3 times, or 4 times, no matter how many times, or even more, 5 or 6 times if it is required. Because Hungary said that we do not agree with the migration policy of the European Commission, because we disagree with the gender propaganda, because we do not agree with the war situation the European Union is heading into, because Hungary chooses the support of Hungarian families and Hungarian young people, because Hungary chooses that Hungarian education is about Hungarian history, about the Christian culture and fundamental values, because Hungary chooses peace. Hungary wants peace for those Hungarians living in the Transcarpathian region in Ukraine. Therefore, what it is currently happening against the Hungarian students and researchers is no more than a political vendetta. It is a disgraceful blackmail. Youngsters are becoming victims. The European Commission is making our youngsters victims, which is continuously talking about democracy, accepting others, inclusion. And what does this European Commission do? Excludes and steps on us. This is the very reason why that the Hungarian students and researchers have been excluded from the Erasmus and the Horizon program. Well, I put it simply, so students who are Hungarians or not Hungarians but studying at a Hungarian university, or Hungarian researchers or non-Hungarian researchers but are doing researching activities at Hungarian universities. There are 204,000 EU citizens who are affected in their fundamental rights of education are affected by this, and 20,000 researchers' interests are affected and hurt by these measures by the European Commission, by Brussels. Now, they said that the next step of the rule of law procedure has to be applied. Well, if the rule of law procedure has to be implemented, is nobody else than those who are in a disgraceful and evil manner abuse the rule of law procedure, because this is what exactly happening. Let's just go one by one. What is happening exactly? Number one, education is a national scope of authority. It has nothing, Brussels has nothing to do with the fact that how a country of the European Union organizes its own education policy. But it could be painful that we are not talking about the excellence of the Brussels-based bureaucrats, but we are talking about Hungarian heroes, how they protected Christianity in Europe and how they are protecting it to this very day. The second part I would like to mention is the autonomy of the Hungarian universities. Well, the leaders, the rectors, the heads of universities stated, the Senate of the universities stated that they are working in an autonomous manner. So the autonomously elected leaders of the university, the Senate, 47% of them requested this procedure, not the government. The head of the universities requested this. Well, if you're talking about autonomy and the autonomously elected bodies of the universities requested this procedure and the government supported them, then at the end of the day, Brussels is going against the decision of the autonomously elected governing bodies of the universities. It is an old communist trick. They are trying to get us done by trying to take away exactly the autonomy from the Hungarian students and from the Hungarian universities. Horizon and Erasmus are directly EU-financed programs. Brussels students, Brussels researchers. Well, the statement is the following, that the Hungarian researchers are stealing. They are saying that the Hungarian university students are stealing money. This is what they are stating. Well, have a look around in your own wallet here and on your bank accounts or in your text messages, please, first here in Brussels. So, what's going on? In December 2022, the European Commission excluded 21 Hungarian universities due to the reason because a regulation was implemented, which was recommended by the Hungarian universities in advance. Two issues were flagged by the European Commission. Both of them were legally acted upon it. And what was the answer? Exclusion. Well, what did they say? What is the problem? There are politicians, 11 politicians out of the 105. So there are politicians in the board of trustees. Well, if you look at Austria, every second member is a politician. So what was the other issue? The selection, election of the rector. In Hungary, the Senate is in charge. In Sweden, the representatives, delegates of the government. So Sweden is autonomous, Austria is autonomous, but Hungary obviously not autonomous, according to Brussels. Well, we carried on with negotiations, and after the negotiations, after the Hungarian government implemented the law that politicians cannot be members of the board of trustees, but we know clearly that they can be, well, not in Hungary, surely. They have implemented the legal act that only board of trustees can only be in their position for a maximum of 16 years. The European Commission came up with additional requests. But hang on tight and fasten your seatbelts. Number one, first of all, in the light of autonomy, the maintaining bodies, from the maintaining bodies of the universities, the rectors, professors who are running the university had to be excluded in the name of autonomous management. Yeah, exclude these people. Number two, second request. NGOs based in Brussels have to be involved during the elections to make sure that everything is going all right. Well, in case of an educational policy which is in the national scope of authority. The third one is the most interesting. So if in the name of autonomy, they would like to implement conflict of interest matter procedures which are elected in an autonomous manner, So Brussels would like to implement a conflict of interest procedure. Well, that was way too much for us. We went against the European Commission at court. But this is not only the legal action in place. Since the spring 2023, 6 heroic universities went against the European Commission at court. So the European Commission, European Parliament, and the Council in front of the court, and 6 heroic Hungarian universities. The lawsuit started in March 2023, and in September 2025 was the first court hearing. Well, it took some time. During the first hearing, there were 8 judges, and the following question was asked. Was there an initial impact study prior to the implementation of the sanctions? Well, Brussels bureaucrats were not being able answering, but nobody could report about completion of an initial impact assessment because there was none. They have excluded 200,000 university students and 20,000 researchers without an initial impact study. The rectors of the Hungarian universities were not contacted. The Senate members of the universities were not contacted in Hungary. And when the heads of universities sent information about autonomy, and that is a better solution in the new model, their requests or their questions were not answered. And there is one more thing, which was a lie, and I would like to put it right. When they're saying that the Hungarian universities are not autonomous, and they are talking about the scorecard of European autonomous universities, well, that study has not been done because they said, well, the Hungarian universities are operating in such special way that no such study or investigation will take place. Well, but it was not the case that the study or the investigation was not done, but they just simply said, well, the Hungarian university differs. So lies and lies and even more lies, a political vendetta, and a political witch hunt, just because one nation stands up for one thing that we want. Hungary wants to tell, what do we teach to our children, what do we give to our families, and how we would like to organize our future. Well, imagine, even Mr. Ferenc Krausz, our Nobel Prize professor, has also been excluded because the European Union and the European Commission is doing so well that even a Nobel Prize winner, Hungarian professor, is not getting any support. Why? The only reason is that because he's Hungarian and he's from a Hungarian university. Well, of course, the Hungarian government started the Pannonia program, which is a lot better than Erasmus, and the not a Horizon, but a Horizon program. And we are not financing gender research, but truly scientific advancing programs. Well, this is high time that everybody wakes up, and it is time to just stand up. We have done what we had to do. We are ready to hang on. If you follow us, we will be the majority. And those who are putting to an end to Europe, education, migration, and war, and all other areas, name it, well, hopefully they will disappear. Thank you very much.
Hongrois?
Non, je vais m'exprimer en français et en anglais.
I will be speaking in French and in English.
Kedves miniszter, Madame Griset, chère Catherine, Monsieur le ministre,
dear Catherine, dear panelists. Thank you so much for having organized this conference in such a short time. This really proves that this subject is finally looked on. And I think this is something that will not age so well. Why? Because in 5 to 10 years, Europe will look back and look at itself and wonder, did we really do this? Is it possible that we excluded dozens of thousands of students and professors for literally nothing? Because this is really what we are talking about here. And once again, Hungary is an example. For some, it is the bad player, and for other ones, it is a beacon in the dark. And what happens to those Hungarian students? This could happen to other students, to other governments that might have the bad idea to follow their wake. And as Georges Brachin said, others do not like others to follow their steps. And at the time, the situations were different, right? But today, it's really what's happening. So I will give you some details, legal details that will complete what Minister Hankó said so eloquently, because everyone has those questions. Why 21 universities were excluded for something that has to do with the state of law? Well, if you look into the details, you realize that this is absolutely stupid from the Commission's part. And as the Red Cardinal said, if you tell me how to do so, I will find the right man to do the right thing. Why are the Hungarian universities excluded? Well, the Commission is acting in a very arbitrary way. Why? Well, they have this notion, their own notion. We talk a lot about the European Commission, and there are really good reasons for that. They are the ones who are behind all those problems. On a legal standpoint, if we could go forward in the presentation, please. It is the Council that takes decisions. So technically, those are 25 member states, besides Poland at the time, who adopted one decision under the regulation for conditionality of European funds against Hungary. And this decision has only 2 or 3 articles, and in Article 2, first paragraph, it is said that about 55% of funds will be taken away from Hungary. And in the second paragraph, you can see something that is very obscure, which is the legal basis that they use to exclude those 21 Hungarian universities. The consequences, well, Mr. Minister told them to you. Now, what is interesting here is that we can see that this Commission's decision, which was given to member states, which afterwards only signed it, is a decision in which the words students, Erasmus, Horizon, researcher, or professors are not mentioned once. Everything was done to really make them vote on something that they probably did not have any idea on what they were voting on. And you know what this led to. Many Hungarian students, researchers, as well as European students or other students that study in Hungary are excluded from everything, not only from Erasmus and Horizons, but from any European program. Next slide, please. This is all based on this regulation of conditionality that was used only against Hungary. And many were asking, well, sure, some funds were taken away from Hungary, but what is nice with the rule of law in Europe, according to the Commission, is that it can do the same with other tools it has. In the case of Poland, the Commission didn't even use such a procedures and took 137 million euros from Poland that were given back once Poland voted the way they were supposed to. It took them 3 months. And in 6 months, all the charges under Article 7 were dropped. This is the paragraph at the end of this slide, which is the legal basis that justifies excluding those 21 Hungarian universities. Here you have words which as trusts, fiducials, etc., which is very bureaucratic. Next slide, please. So what are we really talking about? Well, in practice, 21 universities have chosen to be more autonomous. One of the worst paradox in this whole thing is that universities that chose to be more autonomous are punished for it. And under the new Hungarian law on education from 2018, they are effectively more independent. And paradoxically, those who did not do so and remain extremely dependent of red tape and the public system, well, those had no problem. Let's go back a little bit on the legal backgrounds, especially in the regulation 2092 from 2020, according to which breaches of the rule of law must be affecting or seriously risk affecting sound financial management of the union. This is what we called a causality test, which this regulation imposes. It should be applied, and the problem is that it is not applied. So the question is the following: is this regulation enacted to protect the budget or to enforce rule of law, which is a conception that exists in Brussels and that is interpreted the way one wants? I think, therefore, that this article is very important because it proves there is a real risk. In the case of the Hungarian university's exclusion, there is no tangible proof of this. And CGE, which was mentioned by the minister, has very clear arguments. This procedure has been going on for 3 years with no ruling so far, but on a legal standpoint, I think that everything is said and done already, and yet we still do not have any ruling. Once again, I think it is important to insist on the fact that those 21 universities made the choice to be more independent, and I will give you some concrete examples on those universities or supposedly controlled by the government. One of those universities, which has been sanctioned, and which, by the way, was the first to chose this new status, elected its own rector last year. For the first time, a rector that is not from Hungary is at the head of the Corvinus University in Budapest. He is Belgian and comes from the ULB, the Free University of Brussels. And let me just say that it is not the most conservative of universities. And yet one of these universities that was allegedly not autonomous, not independent, decided to choose as its rector the previous vice rector or dean, I do not remember, of the university that just called one of its cohorts Rima Hassan. This really gives you an idea of how absurd this whole situation is. So what is this conflict of interest that the Commission talks about? Well, it really depends. It's ever moving and depends on the kind of negotiations. And this all began with the presence of 11 politicians, which were elected on the field sometimes in administration boards. And as Mr. Hankó has explained, these universities have a very classical functioning with the board that takes strategic decisions and the rector board for academic decisions. This is a very old model, nothing new here. This is a model that exists in many states, by the way. As it has been said, this is something that is very particular, something that was authorized about everywhere except in Hungary. So a carve out on the rule of law, this sounds like a paradox, right? Those 11 politicians were the excuse to initiate those crusades, this vendetta. But they resigned in February 2023, nearly 3 years ago, and yet the sanctions remain. The Commission takes its decisions on hypothesis. There is no tangible proof, no evidence of fraud or of a risk of fraud. None whatsoever. And one of the reasons here is that it is technically extremely difficult or even impossible to embezzle Horizon and Erasmus funds because the people who they are destined to, well, they are the one who get them. It is nearly impossible to embezzle them. Those are mere hypotheses. So those are the questions that we should ask.
So how come that boards can be tantamount to an infringement of the rule of law? And especially if they exist in other EU member states. And again, why board? How can a board be a significant risk for the EU budget? Third question, how come that we are adopting sanctions on mere presumptions, on imaginary infringements? Imagine, sorry for the absurdity of my example, but imagine that now I just have the strong suspicion that Mrs. Griset is about to steal my watch. And just because I'm really convinced of that, I call the police and they take her to the police station, just in case. This is, I mean, exactly the type of reasoning that the European Commission is using and made, adopt, made the member states adopt. And as also Minister Hankó said a couple of times, I think it's very relevant. Did they ever conducted an investigation? Did anyone from DG EAC or from DG Budget? I say DG Budget because on that file, I think it's also important to stress that it's not the education people in charge of it, it's the budget people. Here, this file today in the big bureaucracy of Brussels is not on the table of DG EAC, it's on the table of DG Budget. And of course, on the table of the cabinet of the president, as we all know. But did anyone bother to call a single rector to say, hello, is it true that there is a problem of academic freedom in your university? Is it true that you have a board that is intervening in every decision you take? Is it true that there is mismanagement or something like that? Is it true that the government is controlling you? Not a single rector, not a single student, no one has been called. And so there was no prior investigation to that. Next slide, please. And just to give you as well a very last paradigmatic example of this stupidity and absurdity is that in the meantime, a 19 package of sanctions after, Russian students remain eligible and Russian professors remain individually eligible for Erasmus and Horizon. By the way, I'm fine with it. I don't think that education should be politicized, not even to Russian students. But as a matter of fact, today, Russian students are much better off than Hungarian ones. And again, I mean, is there any rationality behind than just a blunt and infamous vendetta? Just because we went to, take hostages 204,000 students, maybe to sanction you for other things. I think that now this example speaks for itself. Next slide, please. So here, in the name of the rule of law, we have a presumption of culpability on hypothetical behaviors without a proper legal assessment, leading to a collective punishment, to a blatant discrimination, to an infringement of the freedom of movement, without a preliminary investigation, without a judicial review, going far beyond the EU's competences, all that in the name of the rule of law. Is that Soviet or Orwellian? I let you choose. And coming back to the freedom of movement, we just saw this week that for the Court of Justice, the freedom of movement is the perfect excuse with their very extensive approach and interpretation to impose, for example, same-sex marriages in countries that do not want to have them. And so it's really like a Trojan horse, but when it comes to Hungarian students, suddenly you can exclude them fast, clear, without any doubts. And let's come back also to the competences. Minister Hankó said Article 165 of the treaty says that neither the content nor the organization of education systems belongs to the EU. It belongs to the member states. And still, by art of magic of the rule of law, the Commission is now entitled to dictate to Hungary about the length of the mandate of the Board of Trustees in Hungarian universities. Does still, like the principle of conferral of competence, have meaning in the European Union? I also wonder about it. Next slide, please. So, just a couple of details also to show you the level of bad faith. Basically, the talks are currently stalled, and frankly, we don't expect any progress before the next Hungarian elections. Maybe some people in the opposition here, of the Hungarian opposition, believe that if they win, they will get the Erasmus money back. Well, if they do it à la Tusk, they might actually be right. The last two conditions that the Commission basically, raised in the middle of the negotiations are those two. That the prohibition for rectors to serve in the Board of Trustees, as the Mr. Hankó explained, we don't even understand why, and also the mandatory involvement of NGOs in the selection process of Board of Members. Catherine, can you imagine, for example, that today or tomorrow the Commission is going to tell the French government what NGOs are supposed to be involved in the procedure to elect the new director of Sciences Po Paris, for example? They should actually, but yeah, imagine, I mean, this is the level of intrusion that we get from Brussels. And again, here the Commission keeps raising new conditions to avoid an agreement and prolong the sanctions. And as the Minister said as well, we had 6 Hungarian universities who appealed against this Council decision, cooked by the Commission, but still a Council decision. It has been declared eligible, so the process is going on. The legal case is pretty clear, not to say crystal clear, but for the time being, we're still waiting for Godot. Next slide, please. Yet, and this is, I think, a very, very telling picture, the number of foreign students in Hungary since the adoption of the sanctions is growing. So sorry, Brussels is not working. The blackmail is not working. Basically, from 40,000 to 45,000. This is so an increase of more than 10% in a couple of years. Hungary is extremely attractive. The world doesn't stop in the European Union. University cooperation doesn't stop with Erasmus. So the impact in terms of mobility is limited. But yet, it's not the point. The point is that it's a matter of principles, that Hungarian students are accepted, that Hungarian universities don't suffer from this reputational damage. And again, it's a matter of principles that justice prevails. Because what we are experiencing now is an abuse, an arbitrary Orwellian abuse of the rule of law, just for the only purpose of punishing a country. And you know, it's indeed very sad. Some years ago, I was working for the European Commissioner for Education and Culture, and we celebrated the 30 years of Erasmus. And Erasmus, let's face it, is probably the best brand that the EU has. The most notorious and the one that remained uncontroversial until very recently. No one dared to politicize it before. No one. It was a sacred cow. And again, you know, it was meant to build bridges with everyone. That's why students coming from the countries that are like the worst dictatorships in the world could come to Europe and benefit from Erasmus. And why not? Personally, I have no problem with that. But the only time that has been politicized is against a member state. And now, of course, this contrast, this infamous situation comes very much in contrast with the will of the European Commission to expand Erasmus to countries that are not European and to countries that, if I may say, in terms of the rule of law, might not be the best examples neither. As the European Union is not the best example neither. And I think when it comes to the rule of law, the first question we should ask ourselves is why the worst student in the room became the master of the class and is now teaching lessons to the others. So again, I wanted to thank you also on behalf of Minister Hankó for your interest. And please don't waste a single occasion to raise awareness about this case. the main ally of the European Commission is the indifference around that case. It's an infamy. In 10 years, in 5 years, we will look back at this situation as one of the worst infamies that the EU has ever committed upon a member state. And I think it will be even better if from now on we take this topic, with passion and incensed, with indignation, as we say in French, because it's something that could happen to any other government, to any other students, to any other university. And again, what is happening is the exclusion for absolutely nothing, if only political reasons. Thank you very much.
Bonsoir à tous. Merci beaucoup d'être présents. Merci à...
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Griset, for the invitation to this conference on a very important matter. We'll all agree, Erasmus. So we'll try to understand the proposals of the European Commission. They want to expand Erasmus to a series of countries in the south of the Mediterranean, which implies migration challenges, big ones, I would dare say. These challenges are things we can anticipate, so there is no excuse for the European Commission if they wish to keep their idea. So I think it's pointless to spend too much time on the content of Erasmus because it was already mentioned by Rodrigo and the minister. Erasmus and Erasmus Plus now is one of the main programs of the European Union, one of the few programs of the European Union that's never been opposed in the last decades in our society, in the EU and in our member states. Erasmus is different things. It's like a principle. It's like the internal market. The purpose is to improve the employability of the Europeans, their feeling of cohesion, to increase the level of skills of the European citizens in their own area, which is the European Union. Of course, it has different shapes. The basic one, and it's linked to migration, is mobility of individuals, international individual mobility for students from a country to another to a specific period of time to study in another member of Erasmus with academic acknowledgement of their studies in that area. So there are different dimensions with Erasmus, with teachers, researchers, also institutional relations between the universities, but it's about student mobility here. This is where we see the greatest risks when it comes to the expansion just mentioned. So this expansion was first mentioned as a project a month and a half ago on 16 October through Mrs. Kalakalaya's department. She's the EU representative for security and so on. This was part of what we already call the new Pact for the Mediterranean. It's part of the EU strategy to consolidate the links with a series of countries on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. And the commissioner for the Mediterranean, I will quote her, also accepted the migration dimension that day in this pact. And I will quote the students, what she said about the students. She said, we'll intensify the partnerships in talents with countries like Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, and make it easier to grant visas, especially for those students. So it's an expansion of Erasmus. So if this project comes through, Erasmus would be at the very heart of one of the main migration ways to the EU these years. This is the student migration, or the so-called student migration, and it's at the very center of the way this pathway has been used for different purposes in the member states. And this is what we mean to say here. The migration of students in France is teaching us so much. We're learning so much from the pathways in France because we see the difficulties caused by student migration when it is not controlled, and there are risks behind this potential extension or expansion. So let's start with figures. In our country, since 2019, there's been a strategy called Bienvenue en France, Welcome to France. The purpose is to increase the number, I insist, the number of students, foreign students in our country. They want to reach 500,000 students in Belgium by 2027. And by doing so, student migration has become the main reason to grant a residence permit for legal residence in France since 2022. You see the data on the screen. And now around 1/3 of the new residence permits given in France are given to so-called students, 110,000 last year, plus 70% in 10 years. So this is a migration pathway which is growing so fast. Then we'll see the link with the extension of Erasmus. This dynamics is coming from specific areas of the geography. On the graph here, you have the evolution of the annual number of student residence permits in France according to the origin of the foreigners who receive these permits. Obviously, you see that this increase mostly comes from two areas, that's North Africa and the Middle East. The annual number of residence permits has doubled in 10 years. So which is very interesting when it comes to Erasmus, because these are these countries that we're turning to. This is where we want to expand Erasmus. There's another area which is not concerned by this project, which is Sub-Saharan Africa, where the number of resident permits has tripled in 10 years. So now we have the following situation in France. 53% of foreign students come from the African continent, including Northern Africa or the Middle East, and only 25% of foreign students coming from Europe. So if we have twice as many foreign students in France coming from Africa or the Middle East than from the rest of the EU. So the possibility to expand Erasmus could have another consequence. It could amplify the over-representation of these areas and the under-representation of European students. The first countries of origin of the students in France are Morocco and Algeria. Together they represent 20% of foreign students. And in the student population, foreign student population in France, you have the same countries of origin as in for the rest for migration. In the top 10, you have Senegal, Cameroon, Tunisia, which is also concerned by the expansion project, Ivory Coast, and so on. So I think that this is an important dimension we should remember when we speak about the migration risk linked to this project. It is being documented. We see that when in a country you have the diaspora from a different country or other countries in particular, is a country of attractiveness for foreign students coming from those countries for different reasons, because it makes it easier to settle in, it's easier to create links and bonds locally, and also helps keep or remain there after your studies. It can be granted, a stay can be granted there with a new residence permit, which is not something coming for students, but just for citizens. So this is what we see in France. There's a huge gap according to the citizenships of people who receive these residence permits. For the country of origin, which is the most frequent for migrants, it's Algeria. It's part of the list of the 10 countries where the European Commission wants to expand Erasmus. When you look at the data from the Ministry of Home Affairs in France, well, if you take all the Algerian students who have received a residence permit as students for 1 year, and then 8 years later you see them, and you see that 8 years later, 61% of them still have a residence permit in France, and 2/3 for family reasons. So back to the diaspora situation that we explained before. Let us also remember that 61% is underestimate, an underestimation, because you have two types of people which are not reckoned with. First, have those who remain without papers, so illegally on the territory. It's hard to put numbers of that. And then some students just remain in France, no longer have a residence permit and remain there with illegally. And then you have those students who have become French. Because in France, and you don't know that, but in France, if you have studied for 2 years in the country, your time of residence in the country has been reduced. You have to spend 5 years in France at least to become French, but if you have 2 years of studies, it's 2 years. So if you study for 2 years, you can become French. Some citizens from these countries stay a lot, like Algerians, but others don't stay much, like Asians. If you take South Koreans, it's not 60%, 8 years there. It's less than 10% are still there. 14% for the Chinese. So there's this consolidation effect with the migrant populations which are already present and remain there not for university purposes. So the observation is that there are increasing figures of migrant students in France. To this, we need to add another dimension of importance. There are myths around student migration. It's also about the quality, the level of the student migrants who come. And sometimes, maybe it's the case in your countries, there's this myth of good migrants. It can be the case, of course, and that it should be, of course, in an ideal situation, but today it's not the case. I'll cut a long story short when it comes to quality. We have three observations. First, foreign students in France are overrepresented in some sectors, which lead to few professional outputs and overrepresented in those which have good professional outputs. Secondly, the level of the students. We have a high rate of failure for foreign students. 2/3 of foreign students, international students, do not finish their studies in 3 years. And there's a huge gap according to countries of origin. If you look at those areas concerned by the expansion of Erasmus, you see that the rate of students that do not get their degree in 3 years is 75% for the students coming from the Maghreb. So it's a big challenge. When it comes to selecting the students are not being selected, not enough with Erasmus either. And then there's the third item, which I need to mention, and then it is linked to the budget, to tax, to the social matters linked to student migration. Today, foreign students in France represent 14% of student population, but 14%, they receive 53% of social aid, emergency social aid granted to students. They use 1/3 of the seats in what we call the cruise residencies. These are student homes, okay, with adapted and cheap rent, you know. And we know that student rent in France is a major issue. Okay, student accommodation is a major issue. So they really depend on the social security system. And so we do not require a lot of evidence that these students have resources and money. You just have to say that you have your own income, like 615 euros a month. It's changing from one country to another. Of course, you cannot compare all EU member states, but in France, you cannot live with 600 euros a month, even less so in Paris, where you have most foreign students. So there's another challenge, which is the renewal of the residence permits. If you see that the student is not independent and fails studies, maybe he's not receiving his student permit anymore. But in France, this never occurs. Only 2% of the renewal requests are not agreed, they're rejected. So the criteria set are very low. You should not repeat more than 3 times the same year. You should not miss more than X days per year. That's it. But actually, we're not very demanding with the foreign students in France. So we see the following. It's a list of lessons. It's about the budget. The audit court in France has estimated that the net annual cost for foreign students in France is 1 billion euros a year, expenses for those students, social expenses, but also resources that they bring, okay, with VAT and so on. So it's a 1 billion challenge. Then they also would like to draw our attention to another item. It's the capacity of students to choose the capacity of the universities to choose their students. So far, the member states are free to choose the students they want. There's an EU directive in 2016 with a very general framework. Most of the time, politicians remain in charge, but in France, it was decided that this policy would be handled by the universities, which is very risky because, as you know, some universities have an ideological vision of the matter, and beyond ideology, you have commercial challenges. Universities are supporting sectors with foreign students only, otherwise they're not attractive for the French students or European students anymore. So we need to have political oversight on all this. So we can do that with student migration. It's easier with much more than family migration or the right to seek asylum because of the treaties of this house that could be revised someday. But with the migrant students, we could act faster. So as a conclusion, Erasmus was a success. It's a project that Europeans like. And today it was decided to turn it into a migration policy tool. It's a tool. And so it's creating greater risk for our society when it comes to controlled migration. Also, it should contribute to the success of the European project. And I think the European Commission should not sell the family crowns, actually, because this is Erasmus. It's a family crown. Well, thank you for this presentation. Laurent, over to you. Well, thank you, Catherine. Thank you for the nice introduction before. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to speak now. And I'm not going to speak as a chair of the delegation of the Mashrek countries, but as a French member of European Parliament. But above all, I would like to speak as a professor, a university professor, with my missions are care, education, and research. I speak as a member of National Board of Universities, CNU, French, of course, and I pay great attention to freedom of academia and in exchange between our university members. This is why I'm against this usage of Erasmus Plus to support ideologies and networks which are fighting against our values. On 16 October 25, you said that the High Representative of the EU, Mrs. Kaja Kallas, presented the Pact for the Mediterranean. And in that text, she said that opening Erasmus Plus to Algeria, Libya, Syria, and the Palestinian territory is something that she wants. Now, let's be honest, it's a political mistake, it's an academic mistake, and a strategic mistake. So using Erasmus in that way is about a treason for the European spirit. Erasmus was never designed to make up for the diplomatic weaknesses and failures of the Commission. We speak about a common culture with Algeria, Palestine. It's absurd, but it's also dangerous. As a university member, I said clearly we should not play with the academic freedom. Who will defend a French student who's imprisoned in Algiers for his opinions? Who will protect a European student who's an activist for women's rights in those countries, in some countries where women's rights do not exist, who hardly exist? Who will provide for the safety of a Jewish student facing pro-Hamas ideology in our campuses? Each grant given to a student from Tripoli or Gaza is a grant which is not given to a European student. That is the reality. The European Commission was not able to protect the Europeans or ask for the freedom of a journalist who was arbitrarily jailed in those countries. So how can it protect our students? So the EU pays and knows what it's paying for when it's paying for these Islamist universities. Let's look at facts. They were clearly stated. Islamic University of Gaza, or they're close to some people close to Erdogan, who are close to Hamas. These people who have received 250,000 euros of EU money. You have those rectors who followed homophobic, anti-Semitic, was supporting the Hamas ideology. They're all well known. In spite of that, we said it, but the EU Commission has kept the partnership. The same scenario happens with Gaza, as you said, 1.8 million euros for this Hamas campus. So should we remind the Commission what this means? You need to filtrate, check, protect, and in some cases they are very good. In others, they try to look the other way. So should we remember that the EU is financing Islamist universities and it's exporting money, it's exporting our money, and they're importing their ideology. In our campuses, the Muslim Brothers are present, and here in Strasbourg, through the Association of Muslim Students of France, or in Brussels, it was already mentioned there, where some teachers called promotion Rima Hassan at the Brussels University. These are not weak signals, these are warnings. Let's not let Erasmus become the Troy horse. The Pact for the Mediterranean should not impact Erasmus Plus. Erasmus Plus is not something to bargain. It's not a tool for diplomacy. It's not something we need to use to face hostile regimes which are against our values. The state and the universities know how to build their partnerships. They do it better than the European Commission. They have requirements which are higher. So, ladies and gentlemen, paying for our enemies means supporting those who want us to fall. It's digging our own tombs. Let's export our know how. Fine. Let's export our openness. Fine. But not at the expense of our security, not at the expense of our values, not at the expense of our students. Let us protect Erasmus. Let us protect our universities. Let us protect intellectual Europe, which is our greatest strength. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Laurent.
Thank you very much, Laurent. Fabrice, you have the floor. Thank you, Catherine. I would also like to applaud what Laurent and Nicolas have said. They gave us statistics and ideological elements to understand how this Erasmus Plus heresy is leading the way to destroy Europe. I think opening Erasmus Plus to Maghreb, to sub-Saharan African countries, is one more provocation. In my former professional career, I could see that for the European Union, there always was a way to destroy borders. Erasmus used to be a policy to exchange European students, and I hope it still is. And this policy had its worth, where European students could get to know others and to learn how to live together within Europe. But what we see today is that the Commission wants to destroy Europe's borders, and I saw it as the external borders have been betrayed by NGOs complicit with the Commission to smuggle migrants, I have been told. And I am afraid that the Erasmus program is following their leads. What has been used before for Europe is being instrumentalized with such cynicism, using the name of Erasmus, which is a European humanitarian figure. And with the other ones, he contributed to develop critical thinking, to develop a form of universalism in which debate is accepted, contradiction is accepted, and not the way it is today, with more and more Islamic rhetorics, an ideology that kills discussions, that intimidates, and in the end is replacing European and Western culture, our national culture, by importing a form of supremacy which is given to Islamic organizations which are close to the Muslim Brothers. And as my colleagues see, there is a risk for security, which is materialized by the massive influx of people. So there is an ideological risk, which has been clearly identified by our group as well as Laurent Castillo. And we enjoin everyone not to open Europe to Islamists. And I know that the president of the Patriots French delegation did so many times during the last presidency as well. we need to denounce the fundings coming from the European Union to organizations close to the Muslim Brothers. This has been evoked by the Hungarian minister as well, and I think that in the culture committee of Catherine, you can see where this is all leading. It is becoming increasingly clear that the Horizon program has been used to fund a study called the European Quran. As you can see, this ideology is firmly anchored in the institutions in Brussels. The European Commission is a Trojan horse which weaponizes everything that can help our enemies make their ideas penetrate our continent. Ideology is a first step. And we are being regularly told that the real problem is Islamophobia. This is something that I heard a few months ago, as we finally were able to have a discussion on the origin of anti-Semitism and its rise in Europe in the last years. And when I asked the representative of the European Commission to describe the profile of an anti-Semite in 2025 in Europe, she answered that we are mixing everything. The real problem is Islamophobia. And that anti-Semitism comes from the heart of society. And I asked, what society are you talking about? And her answer then wasn't clear, really. But I think this really proves that today this ideology is really pounding on our borders, trying to make them fall, to defeat the specificity of Erasmus. And as it has been proved by statistics, there is a massive influx of people that have nothing to do with our culture, nothing to do with what Europe and European humanitarians have been fighting for in the last 5 centuries. And there is a security risk. Why? Because giving visas to people who are already sympathetic to Islamism, well, this means that we are risking to import terrorists or to import professors, those who try to make people in our cities to convince other ones to commit terror attacks. As we have seen today, there are some corporations which needs to interpolate the budget authorities. If I had to give some advice or to give some conclusions on what we should be doing, well, first of all, I firmly believe that we need to carry out an audit. Why? Because this is our money. This is the Europeans' money, which is being stolen by Erasmus Plus. European students' prerogatives are being stolen by foreign students, and I'm convinced of it. This is what we see with net costs. We saw that in France, 1 billion euros. This is the cost to welcome foreign students coming from those zones. This also is true of student accommodation, and I think that about 70,000 French students cannot find a room in student accommodation, and I think this situation also happens in many other European countries. So before we finance this invasion by our enemies and maybe by terrorists, the European Commission, if it wanted to do something useful for once, could do something to make accommodation easier for European students. This audit could base itself on the premise that we are massively spending from European Union funds, and also on the basis that there are some ideological programs, and now is time to say stop. We have to question ourselves about the roles of NGOs as well. An investigation committee needs to be looking into the roles of those NGOs. which is why I think that the different pieces of the jigsaw are coming together, falling together, going from the constatation that funds are being embezzled, but also from the fact that NGOs are accomplices in this, ideologically and financially so. It is therefore necessary to go back to a more European exception of what Erasmus is, as well as reaffirming national priority in France. When it comes to European programs, we need to be able to give precedence to Europeans. Well, this is where I will conclude my presentations. Thank you so much.